So I live in Houston, and recently Houston was lucky enough to dodge Hurricane Laura. Unfortunately, Louisiana was not so lucky and was hit horribly by by Hurricane Laura, and it did massive damage there and took down um, a large area of power lines, and they will be without power for weeks. And it reminded me, why I built my Powerwall. My Powerwall primarily is for natural disasters. I have power in my house. I have relatively cheap energy. I don't need a Powerwall. I did it A, as an experiment, but B, as a backup for a natural disaster. Now, Hurricane Laura made me think about what I would use my Powerwall for if I didn't have power for a week or two, and how long could my Powerwall last? That's another important question. And the reason actually this all came up is I recently saw a gentleman on Nextdoor posting that he had just bought the new Tesla Powerwall, which is the 13 kilowatt model. And this is a 12 kilowatt, this is a 12 kilowatt Powerwall here, so similar size to the new Tesla Powerwall. And he also was going to use it primarily for emergency power for his house. But there's a couple things to consider with a Powerwall and emergency power. Something like the Tesla Powerwall, which was grid, which is tied into your entire house. There's a couple disadvantages to, in an emergency situation, having your Powerwall tied into your electrical grid, and not the outside grid. I'm talking about the grid inside your house. There are some things that you will have to consider, and energy will become incredibly important. Energy usage will become incredibly important in an emergency situation. So we are going to talk about a few things and how I will use my Powerwall when the next hurricane hits Houston. Back when Hurricane Ike hit, we had no power for 10 days. And I did not have a Powerwall then, but I do now. So, might as well start to plan a few things and figure out what I will and won't use my Powerwall for. So I'm on Tesla's website here for the Powerwall. And interestingly enough, the very first thing on their website is that the Powerwall is a great option for emergency power, when a disaster hits. Now, you have to understand how big the Tesla Powerwall is, how much energy appliances draw, to be realistic as to what the Tesla Powerwall can really power. And this is not a Tesla Powerwall versus other Powerwall video. This is people need to be realistic about what a Powerwall is capable of in an emergency situation. In an emergency situation, like a hurricane, your power could be gone for, say, 10 days. Your solar system might get damaged, or at the very least, it's likely to be rainy and overcast for a number of days, and so you are not going to produce any significant solar energy for a number of days. And so you will have to make do with the power that is stored in your Powerwall for as long as you need to make it last. Okay, so if we assume we have a 13 kilowatt Powerwall, how long can we actually run some of our devices in an emergency situation? You should know that the average household air conditioning uses about 3.5 kilowatts an hour. A Tesla Powerwall can run your air conditioning for under 4 hours before it is fully drained. And that assumes no inefficiencies in the inverters. So in an emergency situation, it is not realistic that you will be running your air conditioning in your household on a Powerwall. So air conditioning is probably out. TV and DVR. That seems simple. Seems like you should be able to run your TV and DVR for forever on a good sized Powerwall. Believe it or not, a DVR is the second biggest consumer of electricity in the average household. They are incredibly inefficient because they're always spinning the hard drives. Now, some of the newer models have got a little more efficient, but some of the older models were using as much as 500 watts an hour. And that's just the DVR, not the TV. But let's assume you have a newer DVR and an energy efficient TV. You can still expect approximately 500 watts an hour from the TV and the DVR. So you can get about a little over a day out of a 13 kilowatt Powerwall using, if you run the TV and DVR. Now the fridge. The fridge I was actually worried about. I thought a fridge would take a lot of energy. But they really are incredibly inefficient, energy efficient, especially, if you keep the doors shut and just access them a couple times a day. In an emergency situation, a fridge can actually go a long time. They use something like 520 kilowatt hours a year. So 520 divided by 365 divided by 24, if I use my math here. They are using something like 50 watts a year. 50 watts an hour. That's a bit low. That's a super energy efficient. But even if, let's just say we use 200, let's say we use 200 watts. 65 hours you could run. So, 3-4 days you could run a fridge. So a fridge is actually incredibly energy efficient, and you can get a good amount of time out of your fridge. Incandescent lights. These are the old lights that have been banned in the United States. The reason they were banned is they were incredibly inefficient. If you had 10 incandescent lights at 75 watts a light, you would burn 0.75 kilowatts an hour. So those lights would actually use up your Powerwall in 17 hours. Now, if you're using LED lights that are, let's say it's 10 watts a light bulb and there's 10 of them, you would only use 0.1 kilowatts an hour. So you can get 130 hours out of some LED lights. A desktop computer with monitor, you're probably looking at 200 watts an hour. So probably, again, 65 hours. Laptop, 50 watts an hour. So again, you could run a laptop for 10 days, no problems. So in an emergency situation, a Powerwall is going to be good for the fridge, some lights, your laptop, maybe your TV. That's realistic of what a Powerwall can power. You are not going to be powering your air conditioning. You're not going to be powering, a bunch of incandescent lights. You probably should unplug the DVR. And you should know there's one other thing that we're not accounting for here. And that's phantom power draw. Do you know that the devices in your house pull about 250 watts an hour? So that's 0.25 kilowatts every hour just from phantom draw. If you turned on nothing in your house, the phantom draw in your house would empty your Powerwall in 2 days. That is because that blinking light on the microwave, that blinking light on the VCR, that blinking light on your thermostat, all of those things are pulling a phantom draw of 10 watts here, 10 watts there, 15 watts. The average household loses about 250 watts an hour in phantom energy. So that brings us up to the next topic about whether it is better to have a Powerwall that is wired into a house or a standalone Powerwall. Given that the phantom draw of a household is going to run out your Powerwall in 2 days alone, I really think a standalone Powerwall for emergency situations is the way to go. Again, unless you ran around your house throwing every circuit breaker and unplugging every device in the household, your house is going to suck down your Tesla Powerwall in 2 days, even if you never use any device. So a standalone Powerwall, yes, it's going to be a pain because we're going to have to run power cords throughout the household. We're going to have to run a power cord up to the fridge and up to a couple lights. And yes, that's going to be a pain, but we can control the energy that is going out of the Powerwall. We know exactly which devices are receiving that energy. We can monitor it carefully, and we can stretch that power out for a week. I think that for emergency purposes, a standalone Powerwall really has the advantage here. Okay, so we're about to run a test on my Samsung double door refrigerator. This is my portable Powerwall, and we're going to plug my fridge up to it for an hour and see what kind of draw a fridge has, so we can estimate how long you might be able to power a fridge from a Powerwall. So let's turn this on. Let's turn on the 110 volt circuit, turn on the meter, turn on the fan. You can see I have zeroed the energy consumed, and I am about to plug in the fridge, and we will see what kind of energy the fridge uses. Okay, I'm about to plug in the fridge. I am interested to see if the compressor will have an initial kick, and I've got a 1500 watt inverter here. It's possible that the compressor will take more than 1500 watts on surge, and so we'll see if we might even trip the inverter. Let's see what happens. Okay, fridge is plugged in. Okay, 160, pulling 160 watts right now, which is good. I'm not sure if the compressor is actually running. No, I try to listen behind the fridge. I don't think the compressor is actually running, so we're pulling 161 watts without the compressor even running. So I'm going to let this run for an hour. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon here, so we'll let this run for an hour, and we'll see how much energy the fridge actually uses in an hour, and we'll talk from there. So here is my fridge. It is 4 o'clock, so it has been 1 hour that this fridge has been running on my portable Powerwall. We have pulled 88 watts in an hour. And you can see when the compressor is not running, the fridge settles down to around 18 watts. And you should know that probably 10, 15 of those watts are coming from the inverter inside the case. The inverter has a standby current of 10, 15 watts. So this fridge is drawing next to nothing when the compressor doesn't run. And when the compressor does run, we saw it hits 120 watts, which is nothing. The beauty part about a fridge is that it cycles on and then cycles off. So in an hour, we've used 88 watts. So the calculation where I calculated earlier that a fridge uses, 50 to 100 watts an hour, that is accurate. I mean, this is a big full-size fridge, and we're going to have less than 100 watts in an hour. So I am very impressed by the energy usage of a fridge. And in fact, actually, I just heard the compressor kick on, and you saw it spike to 120 watts, and now it's pulling 80 watts. incredibly efficient a fridge. So yeah, at 100 watts an hour, we should be able to run the fridge for 5, 6, 7 days, no problems. Actually, now that we know that a fridge uses actually about 100 watts an hour, if we come back here and convert this to zero point 0.1 kilowatts, we now get 130 hours of use out of the fridge. If we divide that by 24 hours, 5.5 days we can power a fridge off a 13 kilowatt Powerwall. So not bad. A week is probably a reasonable amount of time to expect to be without power after a significant hurricane or emergency. As a quick side note, in an emergency situation when I'm trying to make my Powerwall last, I will not be powering any of my lights with the Powerwall. I actually have a number of battery banks that I've assembled myself. I've actually put my own batteries in these. I just buy the shells for $3-4. And I also have a number of these LED lights. And this is how I will, this is where I will get a lot of my lighting from during during an emergency situation. I can easily recharge these from my Powerwall. I have a 30 volt to 5 volt USB board. And that's how I'll recharge all my power banks. I have a bunch of these power banks, and I'll recharge them off my Powerwall. It is pretty efficient to do a step down and charge the USB versus running the power up through the 110 volt inverter and then back down to 12 volts that the LED bulb might use in a light fixture. So in a emergency situation, I will get a lot of my lighting and a lot of my powering my cell phone and things like that from these sort of devices, from good power banks. And I will save the Powerwall and the 110 volt inverter for probably the fridge primarily, and a bit of television. That is going to be the primary use of my Powerwall in an emergency situation.